Hello everyone and welcome back to my Star Citizen channel. When it comes to radar in Star Citizen, the current discussion is about much more than just a few minor number tweaks. At its core, the question is how strongly radar, target assistance, scanning and power management are supposed to influence combat in the future. That is exactly why this topic is being discussed so heavily right now, because it does not affect just one small detail, but potentially the entire feel of combat. It is also important to keep in mind that by the time this video goes live, the patch may already be live as well, or individual values and features may have been adjusted again. Especially with early patch notes, test builds and first impressions, things can still change quite quickly. Even so, a lot currently suggests that the overall direction is already visible, and that is what this is about here. Not claiming every final number is locked in, but giving a clear overall picture of what is very likely changing with radar and what that matters for players. With that perspective, the topic becomes easier to place. 4.7 currently looks like a possible first major step in the overhaul, while the long-term goal seems to go much further. The radar topic in Star Citizen is currently not just about the single update. On one hand, Alpha 4.7 seems to introduce shorter-term changes that could directly and noticeably affect combat. On the other hand, CIG is also working on a much larger FPS radar and scanning rework in parallel. Part of the community is therefore talking about what may arrive soon, while another part is already looking at the longer-term end goal. The most fitting way to frame it is 4.7 will very likely not be the final radar system, but it could be the first major step that, in my opinion, truly changed the feel of the combat. But first, to give you a little summary, the key points. Many of the radar details currently being discussed for Alpha 4.7 are based on early test notes and player observations. That means values, behavior and balance can still change before the final version. Radar may no longer remain an invisible background system, but instead directly influence aim assist, effective combat range and power distribution. And differences between radar sizes and radar types appear likely to become much more important. That would make loadout choice significantly more relevant. The most heavily discussed point is the sharply reduced range for pip and precision mode assistance. That could make dogfight much closer, more dangerous and harsher. Scanning also seems to be moving toward more active player input. Detecting, identifying and locating targets may become less automatic and more dependent on deliberate use. The larger official rework goes beyond that and includes signature systems, greater detection distances and environmental effect on signatures. Because of that, 4.7 should be seen neither as the complete final state nor as a tiny side change. In my opinion, it is more likely to be a very important intermediate step. But why radar suddenly matters so much? Up to now, many players have viewed radar as a component that exists, but does not really change the way combat is played in a major way. In practice, many ships felt relatively similar in targeting behavior, and target assistance often came across more as let's say, a standard comfort feature than as a true distinguishing mechanic. That is exactly where the possible 4.7 shift begins. Radar may stop being just an information layer and start actively shaping how you fight. In other words, even between pilots with similar skill, it may become much more noticeable which radar is installed and how the ship is being managed during a fight. And to be honest, this would be a real turning point, especially for PvP. Combat effectiveness in Star Citizen does not only depend on raw aim, but also on how reliably targets can be tracked, how assistance systems are used, and how distances are controlled. If target assistance and comfortable targeting are restricted to shorter ranges, the entire rhythm of fight changes automatically, in my opinion. Now let's talk about the core idea behind the 4.7 changes. Based on the current picture, the overall direction seems fairly clear. The better, the larger or more suitable your radar is, the more support you get in detection and target assistance. That could make the role differences between ship classes feel much more distinct. Radar size in particular seems like to become a key factor. If size 1, size 2 and size 3 truly behave differently, then roles such as a light fighter, heavy fighter or larger multi-role ship will no longer be defined only by health or weapons and maneuverability, but also by the distance at which they can still fight comfortably. That would also affect component choice as a whole. Right now, and I'm just honest with you, discussions usually start with weapons, shields or engines. But if radar starts having a real effect on PvP performance, the question which radar am I flying with could become a central part of every meta conversation. For many pilots, the harshest part will likely be the heavily reduced range of pip and precision would support. For a lot of players, pip is a core part of the familiar combat feel. If that assistance kicks in much later, tracking, distance, control and clean aim become much more important. In the currently circulating tests, size 1 radars for light and medium fighters are often placed at around 1 kilometer. That would be a massive shift compared with the current live game feel. Anyone used to applying pressure from greater distance with comfortable assistance would have to adapt significantly. Size 2 radars are often described at around 1.8 km. That would give heavy fighters and larger platforms a bit more breathing room. Size 3 is still less clear, if I understood correctly, and at first it looked as if size 3 offered barely more range than size 2, but later reports also mentioned roughly 2.0 to 2.8 km at full power. More than anything, that shows one thing: a lot still is in flux, but the direction itself is clear. And that direction is this: target assistance is moving much closer to the actual combat space. As a result, engagements become tighter overall. On paper, that may sound like only a few hundred meters of difference, but in Star Citizen, that is huge. Getting closer does not just mean being able to hit better, it also means being easier to hit, entering dangerous zones more quickly, and having less room for mistakes. One of the playstyles most affected would be classic kiting. That means situations where very mobile ships engage larger or slower targets relatively safely from range and then disengage again. If full target assistance only works at shorter distances, a light fighter has to move much deeper into dangerous space. That does not automatically make light fighters bad, but it does change their style. Instead of using distance as a safety buffer, they would need to operate much more cleanly at close range. For very strong pilots, that could be exciting because individual skills becomes more visible, and to be honest, I welcome that. And for players who rely heavily on comfortable target assistance, the learning curve would likely feel much harsher. Larger platforms and heavy fighters could benefit from this. If small ships can no longer work quite so comfortably from safer distance, bigger targets gain a bit more breathing room. Of course, armor, flight model, weapon layout and overall balance still matter as well, but the change in combat geometry alone could shift the meta in a meaningful way. Another interesting point is the possible link between PDC engagement range and the range where pip support also matters. If that remains the case, attacking larger ships could become even riskier. If you have to get closer in order to use your own target assistance effectively, you are also moving deeper into the range of enemy defense systems. That could make attacks on larger ships much less forgiving. Small ships would still be dangerous, but not as risk-free. Coordination, approach angles, timing and exploiting weak spots would all become more important. Now let's talk about why power management matters more now. The idea that radar can consume more power sounds minor at first, almost like a small technical detail, but in reality, though, it adds a lot of system depth. It turns radar from a simple on-off component into an active part of combat management. The real decision then is no longer just which weapons or shields do I want, it also becomes, do I put more power into firepower, into defense, or into radar performance to gain better target assistance and more range. That choice alone could decide whether a fight feels like raw aggression or controlled engagement building. In early observations, the effect of additional power was not always obvious or fully consistent. Even so, much suggests that this is the intended direction. Some player reports even claim that each extra power step could add around 100 meters of radar range. Of course, that should not be treated as a final value yet, but it does show where the system seems to be heading. The clear upside upside is that players get more real decision making in combat. The downside is just as clear. The system becomes more complex. Never or less experienced players could fall behind more quickly, because success would depend not only on aim and movement, but also on handling power and components correctly. A lot could change not only during direct combat, but also before it begins. If tab scans start showing ship names instead of serial numbers, that may sound like a simple quality of life improvement. In practice though, it can make a real difference because targets can be identified faster and more clearly. Even more important is the change around cross-sections. Based on the current reports, these may no longer appear permanently through passive detections alone. Instead, stronger active scanning or pinging may be required to reveal certain targets, especially if ships are shut down, damaged, or trying to stay quiet. Put simply, the logic may be shifting from the system shows me enough on its own to if you want to find something, you have to actively search for it. That could make stealth, ambushes, rescue operations, wreck searches, and finding silent ships much more interesting. And while the community is currently focused mostly on 4.7 and its direct combat impact and of course other things like crafting, a much larger project is also running in the background. This is not just about ship radar, but also FPS scanning, vehicles, signature logic, and environmental effect. The goal appears to be a more, let's say, connected overall system for detection, recon, and visibility. A key part of that is the signature model. Values such as EM, heat, and cross-section are expected to interact more cleanly, more consistently, and more transparently over time. At that point, radar would no longer be just a rough approximation, but part of a broader system that truly reacts to situation, environment, and behavior. And for me, the environmental side is especially interesting. If gas clouds, space phenomena, or object density, or other environmental factors can influence signatures, radar becomes more than just a simple number. Then it is no longer only about how much your ship emits, but also about where you are and how intelligently you use the space around you. That is why 4.7 should not be misunderstood as the finished end state. It is more likely that CIG first wants to test the direct combat impact and then gradually add the larger signature and scanning systems step by step. What is becoming visible now may therefore be more like the foundation than the finished building. Okay, but what does it mean for the community? For the community, the whole situation can be summed up quite simply, to be honest. Radar is evolving from a quiet background mechanic into a real gameplay factor. In the future, it may matter not only which ship you fly, but also which radar you have installed, how you distribute power, and at what distance you want to fight. If this direction holds, 4.7 could seriously shake up PvP habits. Light fighters will probably need to move in closer. Larger targets may become harder to pressure safely. Power management will matter more. Active scanning will gain volume. Stealth and ambush focused playstyles may also become more meaningful in the long run, who knows. So in the end, this is not just about radar as a single component, it is about the language of combat changing. Shorter assistant ranges, more risk, more deliberate power management, and more active scanning could make Star Citizen, the combat may be harsher, more direct, and more distinctive. If that happens, then 4.7 would not be the end of that development, but very likely its first visible beginning. Okay guys, I hope you liked this video, and if yes, I would really appreciate if you give a thumbs up and maybe even sub my account. And that's it for today, and we will see each other hopefully the next time. Ciao.